Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Me and Epiphany, where we talk about science, history, philosophy, religion, and everything in between. Today, by viewer request, I'll be giving my thoughts on a debate between Joe Rogan and a man by the name of Faraz Zahabi, and they're talking about the philosophy of science. So I'll give my thoughts on a few of the points that were made, and we'll go from there.
Bending space. Now, Isaac Newton thought light travels in a straight line only. And to prove this, Einstein said, look, light will bend. If I'm right, light will bend. So they observed the sun during an eclipse and they saw that the light bends. Light does not travel in a straight line. This is another belief that was debunked. I mean, how many scientific beliefs are debunked? Countless, or overturned. Because a scientific fact is not a mathematical fact. They're two different things. A scientific fact can never go higher than hypothesis. If somebody understands the philosophy of science, he understands that every single scientific fact is not equivalent to a mathematical fact, 1 plus 1 equals 2. A scientific fact is always subject to cross-examination and new evidence. So have you ever heard of Thomas Kuhn?
So here he states a scientific fact can never go higher than a hypothesis. And to me, it stood out as a big contradiction. And I believe where the mix up comes is people have a different definition of what science is. Science means knowledge. The objective of science is intellect. We don't call those who rely on false statements to build arguments intellectuals. It only applies to those who have evidence to support their claims. By definition, a fact has to be true because it's something that has been demonstrated to exist. A hypothesis is a tentative explanation that is accepted in order to provide grounds for further investigation. It actually is considered weaker than a theory because theories tend to be tested. I think this too has been muddled in modern times because, for instance, with theories like the Big Bang Theory, it cannot be tested. We can't go back to the beginning and recreate how the world began, although organizations like CERN are in the business of doing that. But by definition, the Big Bang should still be a hypothesis. Then he says a scientific fact is not the same as a mathematical fact, 1 plus 1 equals 2. My question is, why not? A mathematical equation is to be both sound and valid. A sound argument results in a true conclusion based on the truth of all of its premises. If the conclusion is based in fact, it also means the argument is sound. Whereas invalid arguments have true premises but false conclusions or false premises making it unsound. If science is knowledge and knowledge is based on fact, why wouldn't our scientific arguments reflect mathematical ones? This is why I disagree when people say science doesn't know or it could change in the future with new evidence. Then it's not science by definition.
The only time we do factor it in is when we look at ourselves inwardly. But when we don't believe random, we don't believe in determinism. We have free will. That's first person experience. Third person experience, I'm studying Joe. All I see in Joe is billiard balls. So when you have a thought, it's all billiard balls hitting one another. And if I had an infinitely precise calculator, according to Laplace, I could tell you where you're going to be 5 years from now, what you're going to be doing. Why? Because I'm seeing one billiard ball hit another. It's just take that pool table experiment and make it the greatest pool game in history. There are countless atoms. There are countless billiard balls striking into one another. Somebody can calculate the world of physics and tell you where your hand's going to be. Laplace says, I'm going to tell you where your hand's going to be in 5 years from now. But you don't know my personal choices I'm going to make. That's irrelevant. He'll tell you that's irrelevant. Why? Because he sees the billiard balls moving inside your mind, so to speak. Now, Leibniz reconciled the two. Because, see, for instance, when I'm living in the first person, this is my intuition. I'm like, hey, I grabbed that cup of coffee. I had this internal experience that's outside of physics. So Leibniz gives a great example. He says, look, if I was really, really tiny and I'd walk around your mind, I would see blood flow, I would see neurons firing, I would see all sorts of biological interactions. But I wouldn't see anything of consciousness. I wouldn't see your thoughts. I wouldn't see you thinking about your wife, hearing your child's voice, thinking about what you want to have for dinner. I wouldn't see any of that. I would just see billiard balls hitting one another. However, now that I'm having this first person experience, there's something we call intuition, this first person experience itself. You're having this spiritual type of transcendent experience. What it's like to have a thought, what it's like to be me. So for instance, I see that cup of coffee, I desire the cup of coffee and I drink it. Science has no information about my conscious experience, my intuitive experience. Science is not absolute. It cannot tell me everything about the universe. It can only tell me about the billiard balls. It can only go so far. At that point, it has to stop. Because it doesn't have, our senses cannot sense the conscious experience that we're having. The conscious experience is only known intuitively. So first person experience. So Leibniz says this, he says, look, you look at the world, when we study the world, we're all seeing billiard balls hitting one another. Nobody argues about that. However, our intuition is telling us that's all untrue. We have the ability to move our own hand, desire something, grab something, eat something, consume something, make a choice. And he says, how could they coexist? Because remember, in reason, for me to accept something as logically true, I have to eliminate every other possibility. So he found one possibility that till today it's never been refuted. He says he calls it the twin trains. So picture two trains, okay? They're going up and down, side by side, traveling at the same speed. They look like they're connected to one another, but they're not. They're just synchronized. Every time one goes left, the other one goes left. One goes up, one goes down. And so when Leibniz tells you, he says, look, when you reach for that cup of coffee, the universe had already decided millions of billions of years ago that was going to happen. Your intuitive sense just coincides with it perfectly. And he said that's what he calls the twin trains theory, the correlation theory. That your desire to grab that cup of coffee doesn't affect your hand, does not move your hand. That would be impossible. That would be something non-physical moving something physical. So he says that they're just correlated perfectly. When you ask him, how do they correlate so perfectly? He says, well, it's like God took the greatest pull shot in history.
I know that was a mouthful, but here they're attempting to reconcile the belief in determinism and free will. Now, the issue that I had with this, he says that our desires pretty much are not causing us to act, which I disagree with, because the whole point in making us a living soul by God breathing the breath of life into our nostrils, which is, I'm so glad that I put this video out, the God is video out before this one came about, but is to give us our desires cause us to act particular ways. If I love strawberries and I'm thinking about strawberries and I hunger for strawberries, I eat strawberries. If I need to get something from the store, my thoughts come in my mind about going to the store, and then I choose or choose not to go to the store. So to make it seem like those two things are detached, to me makes no sense. And if you say, okay, because he says, well, the universe, I say God, because the universe doesn't have a mind to be able to do anything. But the statement implies that if the universe decided what we are to do, then there's no free will. We're all just doing what God or the universe told us to do, which falls apart from the theological standpoint, because one, God is to blame for your actions because he's telling us what to do. But in the other sense, we're being punished for our actions because God tells us to love him and be holy. And if he were deciding that for us, then each and every person would be loving him and being holy, but that's not what we see. We go outside, we see murder, we see theft, we see people denying God, we see people mocking him. So that obviously isn't true. Joe Rogan says it's woo, and I agree with Joe Rogan at this point. And on a side note, there are people that deny that we have free will because God knows everything. But Pastor Frank Turek has a really good analogy for that. He's like, make it as though you're watching a football game. You're sitting in the bleachers, you're watching a football game. You don't know who's going to score, you don't know who's going to win, you don't know what play is coming next. You're just watching it. But God, who is sitting above us, he sees all from the beginning to the end. So he knows who's going to win. He knows what play is going to be made. But him knowing what's going to happen because of where he's seated doesn't have any effect on what the players are going to choose to do. They are going to choose to do what they have to do in order to win the game. And, we are the ones watching what's going to happen in the game. So you still have free will just because God knows what you're going to do. You still have free will. You're still going to choose to do it. It's just that he sees it before you're going to do it.
Because of Leibniz.
That, to me, is a hard sell.
Yeah. So most people can't wrap their mind around it.
Yeah, it's a hard sell. And first of all, a woman created the first computer code.
He invented the binary code.
Binary code.
Binary code, not computer code, but it's based on binary.
Now, when he's saying this, that your desire coincides with the universe having this, that seems like a lot of woo. That seems like quite a bit of a stretch.
That's the interesting part. Tell me why.
Well, why would the universe have a plan for you and your movement?
Well, he's saying God. Okay. Directly.
Well,
go ahead.
Prove that.
Okay, that's a great argument. That's a great objection.
Why would you say that it would be God?
This argument wasn't to prove God. This argument was to tell you that this is a possibility. Why you have free will is true, and so is determinism.
Yes.
Because can you deny free will? Aren't you having a direct experience of free will?
Well, the only denial of free will would be determinism. The only denial would be that your idea of free will is an illusion, you are really shaped by the momentum of your past, your genetics, life experiences, all the variables and the way you've absorbed emotions and interactions with people, and that these have flavored your very being to the point when presented with an obstacle or an opportunity or a thing, there is a predetermined solution in your mind for whatever the situation is. That's determinism.
Okay, so let's
I should say action rather than solution.
Let's take a step back and look at what Leibniz is trying to say. Okay, he's trying to say, look, there's three ways of knowing something, and yeah, you have to understand this is a brilliant human being. Okay, and many men have said the same thing throughout history. But let's just at least entertain him.
Okay.
He says, look, you know something empirically through your senses. Okay, you touch fire, it's hot. Then you can know something deductively, 1 + 1 = 2, via logic. Then you can know something intuitively, meaning direct first experience. Okay, so let's say. Let's say you tell me, I don't know, I've had coffee tastes great. You don't know that deductively or empirically. The sensation of coffee tasting great is known intuitively, direct, meaning there is no interpreter. In philosophy, we have something called the egocentric predicament.
Okay, so this point right here is, I think, the difference between observational science and historical science. He claims that whomever he's quoting says that there's only three ways of knowing: empirically, by the senses, deductively, and intuitively, by experience. But again, we weren't here in the beginning. And these things existed already. He claims that our thoughts create our experience, but again, we were not here. This stuff was here before we got here, so literally all we're doing is observing what was here, and then we're supposed to be trying to reason from effect to cause, but which I agree, we do use the senses to do that. You have your smell, you have your taste, your feeling, your hearing, your seeing. All these things are supposed to allow us to observe what can be observed, and then we reason from that. We make deductive reasoning from that. However, I think they're missing the revelation part. There are some things that have to be revealed to us or we'll never know. There's observational science and then there's historical science. People that try to go back in time and figure out what happened. But at the end of the day, we'll never really know what happened before we got here. And that's the type of information that we have to rely on God to reveal to us. And then we stand on what he said and then reason from that. So I agree here, but then I also, again, I just feel like they're missing revelation.
Can you picture one with no subjective element? Meaning, because color is subjective, right? Color is a construct of the mind. So if I was colorblind, this shirt would be a different color to me than it is to you.
Right.
However, there would still be one shirt. It would be objective to a certain degree.
Okay.
So a triangle has three sides, three corners. It adds up to 180 degrees. We all agree. Whether you're colorblind, it doesn't matter.
Right.
There's no subjective element to how many points does it have. Nobody's going to come in and say, to me, triangles have four sides.
Right.
You'd be like, that's not a triangle. Mm-hmm. There's not three angles to that.
Right.
You've gone past analytical understanding. Okay, so George Berkeley says, can you picture a triangle without any subjective element, without any color? Let's call it color to make it really simple, really, really obvious. Can you picture a triangle without any color?
You would have to have it in contrast to something so that you could see it. Like if you had if you had a purple curtain, like what we have behind us, and out of that purple curtain, we cut a triangle. Even if there was no color, even if it was just clear, you would be able to see, you'd be able to differentiate between that shape.
But you needed that purple curtain.
To differentiate.
Right. So we cannot have it without subjective element. This was Berkeley's point. Okay. Exactly what you said.
I see what you're saying.
Beautiful. Every objective thing we've observed in the universe is made up of subjective elements. Even when you draw the number 1 on a blackboard, it has to be a color. It has to be.
See, again, here, I think there's a mix-up in terms. He says that colors are subjective. No, they're not. Red is red. Just because you're colorblind and you can't see the red doesn't mean that the red ain't red. And then I feel like he's just, mixing apples with oranges and saying, oh, well, it's the red is a shade. What are you talking about, guy? He goes on to say that all objective elements are mental constructs, that it happens in the mind somewhere, to which Joe Rogan responds that, okay, yes, but it's provable. And if you can always take your thoughts outside of the mind, because the guy starts talking about triangles and things like that, triangles having 3 sides, and that's a mental construct. But Joe Rogan was like, okay, yes, but you can draw a triangle in the sand and then it becomes something that you can see and observe. And then he asks him, if a person dies, does that construct still exist, or does it cease to exist? Which is a great question. The answer is yes, because it wasn't our minds which created these things. It was the product of God's mind, who always existed and who always will exist, who created these things. You can be senseless. Again, you can be blind, you can be deaf, you can be void of taste. You can be void of the nerves in your fingers to, help you feel. But those things are still going to be what they are, regardless if you can't perceive them or not. And, the Bible makes a really good point. Do you know what a fool is? A fool is a senseless person. That means that you are not using, either you lack those senses in some way, but mostly it's talking about those who suppress that kind of truth and unrighteousness. Like, you see what you see, but you're trying to act like you don't see it. You hear what you heard, but you're trying to act like it was never spoken to you. So again, I don't know if this guy is purposely trying to be disingenuous or he's just trying to be overly intellectual. But again, you can't have intellect with false statements. And I'm going to show this one last clip. It's not even from this Joe Rogan podcast. It's actually from a different topic that he was speaking of, and that's what is truth. And this is exactly, let me just play it.
About in the Quran, we'll circle to that later. One truth is more certain than the other. Mathematical truths are more certain than inductive truth, contingent truths. Now let's go one rung below. One rung below is historical truths. Now I hear a lot of debates online. I listen to quite a lot of debates, and it's amazing to me that people still don't understand. And very intelligent interlocutors are discussing historical truths. Historical truths mean nothing.
Okay, so he basically ends up making my point about historical observations, historical science, so-called, because we don't know what really happened back in the day. We're just going off of, testimony, going off what we heard, and trying to go off what we see now and hoping that the past is like the present. But again, he says that there's some truth that's more truth than other truth. That makes absolutely no sense. Truth is truth. That means that there's no falsehood in it. So these gentlemen's conversation goes on for about 30 minutes longer. I'm going to actually end it right here. But although I watched the whole thing, my summation of what this man believes is that there's no way for us to know truth. And I just do not agree with that. I think there's an issue if you have no way to ground your knowledge. And he claims to believe in the Quran, which that's another topic for another day. But there has to be a ground for truth. It has to be immovable. It can't be tentative. It has to exist before us and when we're gone. If you have to gather new information and that new information changes what the so-called fact is, then it wasn't a fact. And I think that's what we're missing when we start changing the definition of words. But those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Let's have a discussion. See you next time.